But I'm going to talk about an unlooked for opportunity to address a curricular issue I've been grappling with and struggling with for some time. So music history in post-secondary institutions is largely taught as a celebration of Eurocentric and largely male composers presented in an evolutionary or teleological narrative that supports an embedded belief in the exceptionalism, even superiority, of Western elite concert music. And this content is also linked to disciplinary divisions, classical versus popular versus folk, with classical on the top. And also the field of musicology, which generally centers on this elite concert music of Europe and its diasporas, and then ethnomusicology, which sort of embraces everything else. So I've been pondering and pushing back on this for a long time, and it's led to my organizing a number of roundtables at the Canadian University Music Society, discussing curriculum and decanonization and eventually decolonization. But it also inspired me to dive into the world of SOTL and do some research on decanonization and this particular study on student perceptions of music and music history, which I did in 2017-18. So I got very grateful for funds from CTL. And part of the study was a survey of undergraduate students who were in the Bachelor of Music and Bachelor of Arts Honors Music major in medial. So this was 193 students, and we sent out an invitation to them. 41 answered, which I don't know whether, I still to this day don't know whether this is good or bad. One of the main things I learned about doing this study was how much I need to know about doing surveys and how much I didn't know during this first survey. But in addition to the survey, I had a research assistant who conducted interviews with 9 of these students who replied to an invitation at the end of the survey if they wanted to have a conversation. So lots of different things. I'm just going to share a few with you. One is that the vast majority of these students connect the study of music history with playing their instruments. Music students study music history in order to play their instruments better, which when you're teaching medieval music becomes a bit of a disconnect. And they play Western classical music on Western classical instruments, just to clarify that. That's what they're talking about, playing better. There was a division between students who were sincerely interested in global music and music beyond this Western canon, and students who really rejected material beyond Western art music. There was also in all of the students a separation of the West from the rest. They felt like certain courses and certain issues belonged with Western classical music, and other things were done in all the other musics. And in large part that the Western music has a history and other musics, they might have a history, but it's not as substantial or it's not as documented, and it's separated. And this was even from the students who were really interested in learning about other parts of the world and other cultures than their own. They also were largely quite ethnocentric about the function of music in society and the nature of what music is, the being of music. So we changed the curriculum at the dance school in 2017 for a more interdisciplinary approach, in part to address some of these issues, which I was aware of before I did the survey. So we ended up with first-year courses co-taught with drama and second-year courses that focus more tightly on music. But in spite of more opportunities for active learning, and I unfortunately don't have a picture of them doing medieval dancing, which was even more active learning than writing on the board. And also in spite of my research, which has reached more and more into questions of decolonization, I ended up the vast majority of the time still defaulting to the canonic content. And this is largely due to the textbooks and textbook material, which also governs the musical examples one chooses. It's a comfort zone issue of teaching as I was taught, and also very much time for prep. If it's not in the textbook, you have to go out and research the material yourself. And yeah, we all come up to the prepping our class for the fall, and there's a great temptation or need often to just you pull out the slides from last year and say, well, I'll do a little bit of tweaking here and there. However, remote teaching suddenly meant that I had to re-prep everything anyway. We were also advised to lighten up on content. And then also it struck me that having online modules, which I divided my classes into online material for content, and then I used the Zoom sessions as tutorials for discussions and group work and critical exercises and so on. That having these things in online modules allowed for less familiar content to be revisited and reflected on. Because another thing I found out from my survey was that after a few years, nobody remembered anything anyway. So my second year course, Crusades to Colonialism, begins around 1000. So I decided to share how my medieval modules changed. So on the left side of the slide is the content this is just from last year, but it goes back several years. And on the right side is the remote content. And as you can see, I moved away from required readings in the textbook, which then when I moved away from the textbook, this allowed me to use different musical examples. And I was able to add Byzantine chant in addition to canonic Roman, or it's often called Gregorian chant, and also to replace a trouvère song by Adam de la Halle with a troubadour song by Contessa de Dia, so using a female composer and performer. I used articulate rise modules where one can combine various modes of delivery. So here I connected troubadour song from the south of France to its very probable origins in Andalusian Arabic music. I used short recorded lecture that provided, among many, many other things, map and text. Then I could move to a really wonderful historical image that shows an Arabic oud player and a European lute player having a jam session together, and then embed in a YouTube video of the same intercultural combination. And it's Cantiga is from Las Cantigas de Santa Maria, which is the historical document. Last winter, just finished now, I taught the second of the two first-year courses for the first and probably last time. And this gave me even more freedom. And I'm going to share the second module of this course, Listening to Revolutions, where we focused on the American and French Revolution in the from the second half of the 18th century. So usually music history from this period focuses entirely on Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, who are known as the first Viennese school and really a core foundation of Western classical music. So as you can see, I put Mozart in there, but I looked at any number of other things besides. So I began by connecting locally with a local spin on the American Revolution by focusing on the Mohawks of Tyendinaga, who migrated here as loyalists after the American Revolution. Nathan Brinklow from LLCU advised me on music, and he also came to join the Zoom session. So there he is right there. For the French Revolution, I used a popular song, La Marseillaise, which obviously became the French national anthem. And I took advantage again of embedding YouTube videos to demonstrate La Marseillaise's ongoing emotional power in fiction and also in reality. I didn't forget Mozart, but I was able to place this elite music in the larger context rather than presenting it as the epitome of the 18th century. And I also included Chevalier Saint-Georges, a biracial peer of Mozart who composed for the French court and then served as a colonel in the Revolutionary Army. And I had to cut the text off because I was clipping images. But you can see Mozart, of course, is very famous and part of a constructed canon of Western classical music composers who included in almost every music history course. The next composer was possibly even more famous than Mozart. So what are my takeaways? Yes, that will take 1 minute. The workload was immense, and I know everybody doing remote teaching experienced something similar, but the freedom allowed me to reach beyond the canon. I proved to myself that a global and inclusive music history is not only possible, but it's just as substantial and possibly even more useful to my students than the Eurocentric version, particularly dealing with early music, which has nothing to do with playing their instruments. So shifting back into the classroom next fall will necessitate yet more prep, but I can again work this to the advantage of widening my history and as a more inclusive music history. So thank you.